Letters to Lisa, Recording 6, Compilation 2, 1316 kilohertz. It's a rather grey day outside today. I was going to have a go at the garden, but I rather think the heavens will open up the minute I step outside, so instead I thought I'd record a letter. I've picked this one out from the ever-mounting pile by random, so I hope it's not too frightening. Right, let's have a read of it. Dear Lisa, the following is my attempt to put to bed the case that killed me. If I'm right, you will be safe. If you are safe, then I have done my job. I only hope that by telling you like this, nobody else has to die. On the 5th of June, 1958, 37 people in the area from Driftfield down to Grimsby were found dead in their homes. In the days following, based on what little information I had access to, 2 more turned up by the roadside on Garraby Hill, having set up deck chairs by their parked car. And while evidence is scarce, I also believe that the capsizing of the Angus family fishing trawler and a number of traffic accidents that night represent further instances of the same phenomenon. But we didn't know any of this at first. The station was already beginning to buzz about the unusual influx of incidents in the city that morning when I was assigned to the cinematically gruesome but honestly quite uninteresting case of a triple homicide at a local all-night bar. It looked like what these things usually look like: drunk men taking an argument too far. Broken bottles, dented countertops, blood and beer, both sticky and stale. Even the radio had been left on, the detuned static underlining the mindless chaos of the scene. 2 of them had nasty shredding slices across their throats, presumably by the toothed end of one of the many broken bottles, and the third, the bartender, had received apparently fatal blunt force trauma to the head from being hit to the countertop, judging by the wound. This wasn't a surprise. In a place like this, the staff were more often danger than the patrons. But something was wrong. I swear I could feel even then the scale of what had happened. The case should have been a simple case of finding the guy who had won the fight, the dead drinker's friend that got away, definitely still drunk, and likely still drinking, full of regret if he even remembered the event. But the manager who had found them this morning said that there had only been 3 when she had left the night before. It's not impossible that 3 men all hurt one another badly enough that none made it out alive, but you get an instinctive sense for human damage in this job, and these wounds would have killed the men almost immediately. They didn't look like the typical fighter's wounds either, but that wasn't what didn't make sense. I asked one of the uniforms to turn off the radio, telling them I didn't need literal background interference on top of my nagging instinct of the crime scene out of place. The static cleared, and so did my head. It's frustrating when one thing is out of place, but when there's 2, you can be sure that they're not out of place at all, but connected, somehow, in the web of things. So I mused out loud, asking how many stations broadcast through the early morning hours that these men must have last been awake, listening to it but shot off in the daytime. And the uniform, whose name I'm ashamed to say I don't remember, corrected me. The radio wasn't tuned to a particular station, but the stray frequency, 1316 kilohertz. As it turned out, of the 12 deaths in Hull that night, my case had been easily the most interesting. Almost every other incident had been an open and shut suicide, and those that weren't had been open-shut murder-suicides of couples, and in one case a father and son. They were unpleasant calls, but with nothing individually prodigious about any of them, and yet self-evidently connected. More than just sharing a date, the early estimates placed the deaths within as little as a few minutes of one another, between 1300 hours and 1330 hours. Reports coming in of similar cases in nearby villages. Skipper called the major detectives, myself and my late partner Daniels, in to discuss the paradox that the deaths couldn't possibly be related, but also simply had to be. I said suicides do jump at specific times on specific days like Christmas. People do just give up on life when life throws something too hard. If there was some uniting factor, they could all just be genuine, legally unconnected suicides that they looked like. But cross-referencing maybe a dozen notes, I couldn't see what that environmental connection might be, and Skip didn't believe that these numbers could be anything but premeditated. Daniel suggested suicide cults. It got a laugh, but when nobody had a more descriptive suggestion, we mapped the crime scenes, radiating out from Hull's urban centre in the kind of pattern one central meeting point might suggest. So we started checking buildings near the centre. But it wasn't a cult. The pattern was right, but Daniel's was wrong. These hadn't been prepared for. In each case, the instrument of death seemed to be whatever item had been closest to hand, as if these dozens of suicides had been decided in the moment. All in the same moment. 5 files, beside my own, mentioned a radio. 2 note that it was detuned, and while it wasn't in his report, Daniels described the same thing at the scene he had visited, although he hadn't noted the frequency. But when the next call came in, 3 young men in West Halton, apparent suicides, sitting around a radio, I had the number checked and logged. 1316 kilohertz. To be honest, I had been certain of the cause from before I left the bar, but this was evidence. I'm not sure Daniels accepted the full weight of what I was suggesting, but the link was undeniable. Somehow, death was in the airways. The map didn't indicate a single meeting point, but a point of transmission. And while Daniel's hypothetical cult could have met anywhere, there were only 2 broadcasting houses near the centre of the pattern: the Revelation and the Humber House. We tossed for who would visit which, but the results didn't matter in the end. We were both of us dead before the coin was in the air. I knocked at Humber House to no response, and I can remember my gut sinking at the thought that I had drawn the short straw without so much as a thought for my friend. I forced the door, and inside there was the distant but cutting sound of static. Daniels had suggested we both take weapons, things evidently dangerous, but I had pointed out that every death was a suicide. What I had meant was that we weren't in danger. How he took it was that guns wouldn't protect us. I announced myself. The building was squat, the rooms packed together around a central hallway, and I cleared each, all empty, but with coats and bags hung over chairs, as if at a party. The radio noise came from above, at the back of the building. At the front of the stairs to the first floor was the first body, a man too mangled to have stumbled down, and who to receive such twisted injuries must have either been thrown, or, it seemed more likely, thrown himself down with great force. A woman lay, arm draped down the stairs, blood streaking down those top few steps. There were 2 further bodies in the top floor hall, who apparently shared the sharp edge of a plastic shard, one halfway out of a doorway. Beyond was a small listening room, with a large stereo sound system built into the walls, and a desk towards the middle with a radio system built in. The table in the centre carried bottles of wine and half-finished plates of snacks, as if from a party. There were 7 people there. They were all dead. When I reported back to the station that there was no sign of any actual transmission from Humber House, and Skip confirmed that they hadn't heard from Daniels, I knew I had won the coin toss. I couldn't stop the captain sending uniforms to the Revelation, but when he told me that they had taken out weapons, I started running. Their van was already parked outside Daniel's car on the road outside that ugly broadcasting centre when I arrived. Of course, the door was already open, broken most of the way off its hinges. There was no static sound here, but there was talking, and I was relieved to hear Daniel's voice, but I was wrong to be. He was thanking the 2 officers for their backup and asked for a gun himself. It sounded like he had been crying. I shouted to contradict him as I entered, that same poor uniform jumping as I crashed in. Daniels demanded I leave. He ordered them to give him a gun. The room was a small recording space with a spin of magnetic tape turning in the wall.
It had been unprofessionally disconnected from the building transmitter, but remained plugged into a large set of headphones, which hung from the ceiling by cables and sat around Daniel's ears. In fact, looking, he was still crying. He told me to leave, told the officers to arm him again. It was worse than crying. It looked like he had run out of all the fluids required to cry, and he had started bruising around the eyes with the strain. As the tape was still turning, I asked him what he could hear. In answer, he told me I was right, and that every incident that day had been an actual suicide, the same as any other time people find it too hard to keep living. He demanded the gun again, but the officers didn't need my countermanding not to obey. Daniels was shaking now. That same officer asked, "Is it music?" Daniels rocked his head from side to side emphatically. "No," he said, "music is beautiful." I asked him to take off the headphones as I drew closer, and the two officers followed, thinking we might have to remove Daniels physically. Why would anybody share this by choice, I asked, and why would people choose to listen? Daniels smiled. The rest of his face no less contorted in fear and upset, but lips nonetheless twisted into the kind of smirk I recognised from his most self-satisfying deductions. He took the headphones off and gently handed them to the silent uniform. I don't know her name either, and I don't think I ever did. She looked at me. I told her not to put them on, but Daniel said, looking at me, "We just can't resist." The officer put the headphones over her ears. The tape inlaid in the wall whirled and span, as if of its own volition. It only took a moment. It couldn't have been more than a couple of bars. She choked in a lump in her throat and began to shudder where she stood. The other uniform went to take them off her, and she drew a gun, and she shot him, then snapped the gun towards me. As I tried to stop her, Daniels was groaning, begging, "Please!" And one moment she shot him in the chest, then herself in the side of the head, destroying the two earpieces of the headset along with herself. The tapes rattled and whined, and then clunked suddenly to a stop. Daniel sobbed a half-conscious apology as he died. He said I had to destroy it. I asked him again what he heard, but he coughed blood and didn't say another thing before seizing up and giving in. That's why this is a letter. That's why I'm writing in still, silent words my experience. So whatever it is, you will know the danger posed without having to hear a single deathly second of the recording. I took the tape with me that day and have felt it twitching, itching to be heard every day since. And today it will, hopefully for the last time. I post this letter and then I listen, because he was right. We can't resist. I have to know what unearthly horror is recorded here, even if it kills me. Yours, Detective Peter Albright.
Well, how very strange. I thought I heard about this a while ago on the radio. This is finally a person I do know. Well, not directly. Detective Peter Albright famously disappeared amid a slew of death by suicide. I think the press vilified him, suggesting him to be the murderer. I think most of the public believed them, as the suicide stopped. No one knew that he sacrificed himself for us. Who knows where he ended up? Well, I was going to listen to the radio for a bit, but I think I'll go for a walk. The weather's cleared up for now. That was Letters to Lisa, Recording 6, Compilation 2. Written by Oliver James Tomkins. Read by Caroline Lawrie.